Well, thank you all for joining me today. To Subu, Rob, Sam, and Abe, particularly to Subu and Rob, our career contracting aficionados. Thank you very much for your time and your insights to be as we're about to discuss today. I'll let everyone kind of introduce themselves in a bit more depth. I'm Julian. I'm one of the directors at Potentia and the facilitator today. So perhaps Rob, you could fill us in on your awareness.
Sure, thanks, Julian. So I've contracted for the best part of the last 15 years, both in Australia and New Zealand, working in a number of different industries from telco to banking and finance, insurance, and more recently in local government and government agencies. And am currently providing enterprise change and organisational design services. So I help organisations achieve their strategic goals and return on investment by leading people from where they are currently to where the business needs them to be through change in behaviours, adoption of digital tools, upskilling in skills and knowledge, and ways of working.
Awesome. Thanks, Rob. And Subu.
Hi guys, I've been in the Wellington market for the last 20 plus years. So I've been a PM for the last 15 years. My core specialty area is in the system integration space. So I've been working, lucky enough to work in a number of private organizations, and in the last 7 to 8 years I've been working in public sector. So I do anything between greenfield development to integrating with out-of-the-box applications as well.
Great, thank you, Subu. And I'll hand over to the Potentiites. Sammy.
Hello, yes, Sam Nowell, and I wear two hats, I suppose: principal consultant for Potentia in Auckland, and also lead the contracting team in Auckland. Myself mostly have tended to work in the private enterprise space, but also have done some government contracting work as well. So yeah, it's me.
I head up the Wellington contracting practice, and probably a bit the opposite in terms of Sam. I tend to focus more in the government sector mainly, but have also done some enterprise and private recruitment as well, but specifically in the IT projects and transformation space.
All right. Well, look, today we're going to discuss what's happening in that contracting market, and I guess from our perspective at Potentia, it's very much been a time of two worlds. That being everything that happened pre-lockdown and everything that's happened post-lockdown. The great gift that we've got today is that our career contracting aficionados here, Subu, you spent a lot of time more in the public sector and with government agencies of recent times to give us that perspective on the public side. Yep. And Rob, I know that you spent a lot of time in enterprise change in the private enterprises, so it would be neat to hear your perspectives on what's actually going on right now with the contracting market. Perhaps I can ask Subu for your opinion on what are we seeing right now? The sentiment of positivity and negativity. Is there fertile ground, green shoots in the market at the moment for contracting?
From a government sector perspective, I see now it's more a time for consolidation for the government sector organization. So they are more focused on stabilizing, but also looking at how can they provide newer services. So, for example, in the education sector, COVID has turned the school, the way the kids interact in school upside down. There's more of online learning and more of online materials that are being provided, and also some of the work that's happening in the government sector is how do you enable the kids to write exams online as well. So there's a lot of innovative work happening, and I think the COVID has accelerated some of those changes to happen more quickly. And
sure.
And a lot of focus is on making things available easily for kids and for for government sector users, I guess.
Would you say that the government's direction has really been around the investing in the well-being of citizens, both in the immediate sense of what's going on in the health sector as well as education and MSD?
Correct, and if you look at the wide-ranging project, it's the employees' core well-being is one of the major factors, but also looking at government sectors are not willing to let go of people at this stage. And with a COVID situation, they are looking at ways to absorb and make sure that there's a healthy pipeline of work within the government sector. So well-being is one of the key drivers, and with that innovation, they are trying to make it easier for those people relying on government sector services.
Excellent. And Rob, what have you seen on the private and enterprise side of things? I know it's not necessarily a Wellington and an Auckland market, but what are you seeing at the moment that's different from that?
Sure, thanks, Julian. So I think there were some interesting data points that came out last week around businesses' responses to how they were faring through hospitality, accommodation and retail, and they're all subsectors of tourism. So from a contracting perspective, we know about Air New Zealand. There's been a lot of people who have left recently. SDA Travel, for example, has been in the media also recently, and there will be others likely to come the longer that our borders are shut. So from a contracting perspective, those sorts of domains are really a watch and see in the here and now. I think what I know through my network and just talking with people I've worked with in the past who are in banking and finance, there's a lot of consolidation and opportunity to convert contractors to permanent roles. Now, in saying that, there is still transformation programs that are trundling along. There's still work required there for transformation. And I think a really interesting nuance is that almost every organisation out there in the here and now has been forced to rethink one of their core components of their operating model, which is the ways of working. We've all gone to remote working, and a lot of that's been done organically. And I do wonder whether there'll be a time soon or later when that will need to be formalised, because quite often you work through changes that happen to your operating model. Again, I don't think organisations have had the chance to do that. We've had to just transition rapidly. So I think there's some opportunity there in that space.
Okay, and so I guess from your perspective, is there much of the kind of the pieces of work being done at the moment? Are they small pieces of work for enterprise, or are they large kind of wholesale change pieces with the enabling remote work or looking at new digital operating models? What are you seeing?
I think it's business as usual in terms of transformation. You also have your regulatory changes that are coming through by industry. They're still there. They're still running in the background. Contracting resources are still required for those components. I think coming up then maybe for certain organisations in different positions a need to reflect on what their operating model currently looks like, as opposed to just allowing it to organically evolve. And there may be some work coming up to do that in the change space and transformation space.
Sammy, for you, what else are you seeing out there?
Well, actually, I was keen to make the point that I reflected back on Subu's comments around, looking after staff wellbeing, and also in terms of your what you're observing there, Rob, as well, in terms of the tools required and the availability of those tools and things. And actually, Julian, if you remember last week when we were looking at some of our latest REM report data that we're looking into, that ITSM skill set and some of the tooling up of those functions like ServiceNow consultants and all that, it seems to be very much at the front of mind, especially in government, ensuring that their service delivery components are really, really on point moving into the future. Because I think, a lot of people were caught with their pants down a wee bit, and they realised that, this is probably going to be a long-term thing, as you say, Rob, and people will need to look at their operating models. But also, people were at that point of no return on some programs as well. So I think those are the ones that we've observed trundling along still. Yeah, it's interesting. I can't, if you ask me to crystal ball for next year, I probably will tell you I can't.
And Abe, what are you noticing from the public sector as far as what's happening? What's the pulse of that market?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I'd probably pick up on the back of what both Subu and Rob are saying. Actually, there's a definite strong investment in programs and projects still happening. And I think, using some of your words, Rob, business as usual in some ways. So we're certainly seeing that across government. And what we are seeing is there has been a real focus on fixed term contract. So basically a permanent role with a fixed end date and permanent hiring. But what we are starting to see, and literally it's only been in the last week or so, we're really starting to see the wheels quake a bit. And what I mean by that is that these programs and organisations are now starting to get to the bottom of available candidates who will do fixed term and permanent. So what we're starting to hear now is clients talking about the fact that in a couple of weeks' time, they're going to need to come out and look at some contractors just because they're not getting what they need from the market. So to me, that's an indicator. This is a phase that we've seen multiple times in the market. I think probably both in Wellington and Auckland, a real push to reduce contractor spend and hire fixed term and perm, and then we've seen it swing back when it's just got to the gritty end. We need delivery, we need things to start moving again, and the demand for contractors has increased. I think what we've seen is probably just a deeper version of that, and we're now starting to see the signals that we're going to be moving back up. How quickly that happens is probably the question.
And that's the question of supply and demand, right? Like if as soon as these transformation programs either re-kick off or continue or are bolstered by further support or extending their terms, we're going to see some fewer people wanting to pick up fixed term contracts and more looking for that hourly rate or returning to the rates that they expected as of last year, right? Any risk as far as
sorry, just speaking to that point as well, I had a little story. I was on the phone to a senior BA last week, who, luckily, like most career contractors, have a financial buffer for times of non-utilization. But he, like many contractors we've observed, have kind of drawn the line in the sand of the rates that they're willing to kind of go down to for these kind of uncertain times. But he was getting calls from a particular financial services organization trying to tool up on BAs, senior BAs, and they said to him that they were really struggling to find people in the market because there just weren't enough good BAs of his level. And then they got to the rate conversation and they were offering what was formerly basically an intermediate BA rate. So, it shows you that people or organizations are still trying to lead the charge in terms of, driving the market rates down for contracting because they see, well, potentially naively that there's just this huge awash of candidates in the market, but it's not the case really, as we've observed. I think unfortunately for project management a wee bit and testing, our data supports that yes, sure, there might be more candidates available. For other disciplines, it seems to be business as usual.
And heading into calendar Q4, I guess that's reasonably good news for those who are in that pool of contractors who are looking for work. Also, a bit of a canary there is the engagement of BAs. I guess BAs are engaged early in project life cycles, right when things are kicking off. So possibly a good turn for the heading into again the tail end of 2020 and perhaps for the start of 2021. I'm not a soothsayer, of course. I can't even tell the weather, but if we are starting to see more and more BAs picked up, then perhaps that's a good sign for those PMs who have been scrabbling around looking for work for a wee while now.
Just on that one, Julian, this being an election year, it's many of the organizations, especially in the government sector, are pausing. They're not stopping, but they are slowing down a bit, and the uncertainty is just adding to more resources being available in certain parts of the sector as well. So it's going to be interesting. I think the next 3 months, 3 to 6 months is going to be very interesting.
Speaking to that, Subu, perhaps you can continue on that point. What kind of risks are you seeing or challenges for the contracting market? We've spoken here about things like being engaged on fixed terms, particularly down in Wellington. And also enterprises trying to switch people from hourly rate contracts to fixed term. Are there any other kind of risks that you're experiencing at the moment, or that you're hearing through your network? Are any challenges for contractors?
No, again, with the government trying to look sensible in terms of the spending they are doing right now, I guess the driver from the government, so to speak, is don't try to splash money around when we are trying to tighten up on budgets and where we are spending, and that is going to continue until post-election period. And once that certainty comes with the new government, things will start to accelerate. And again, whichever government comes in, it's going to be more of how do we tweak the market or enhance the market so that more and more accelerated change is happening, and that means more people are being employed and so on. The risk from contracting, especially in the contracting market, is the next 6 months is going to be governments trying to reduce the spend, which means more fixed term contracts being provided. But once the new government comes in and things start to pick up, it's definitely by first quarter next year to middle of next year, things will start to accelerate.
Next thing you know, we'll have a digital government to it. And Rob, what about that private sector? What are you seeing? What's the finger on the pulse telling you about the risks and the challenges for enterprise change, and even for SME perhaps?
So I think if I imagine myself wearing the shoes as a business owner or operator, I could imagine myself being in a fairly defensive mode in the here and now. We've just had the latest data come through for GDP, which is record negative outcome in waking history, and so I think that is the mode of business operators in the here and now until something else will convince them otherwise. So I would say to expect more of the same. That is, in some industries that are being more hit than others, like tourism and those subcomponents, there's going to be very little opportunity there for contracting. Elsewhere, other industries are consolidating, as Subu's articulated. I think it's very similar. I think another variable to pay attention to, and again, Subu's highlighted this, is the political direction that we'll be moving in. We have two political parties that take two very different views of investment, whether it's to do with business owners and getting the economy going again, or further investment in health and education services. And depending on where that money flows to, will then determine where the opportunities lie for contracting resources and business owners and operators to take advantage of that. And the work will flow from there, I think. But it's very hard to, as Sam said, predict out. I think a layer over the top of all of that too, as well as the pandemic effect, I am reserving myself to the fact to expect more of the same for next year. We've done very well in this country to take the risk and move it from inside our house to outside our front door, but that risk is continuing to grow. You can see that with the data; it's still there. So I think 2021 will look very similar from that perspective as well.
Yeah, and I talk about an L-shaped recovery because there's a big drop, and then the acuteness of that angle, based upon whatever policies are going on right now and the conservative aspects of the private sector as well. We just don't know, right? I think that it'll be interesting to discuss the actual specific risks and challenges that relate to how this change is going to manifest. And perhaps Sammy or Abe, are we talking, because we've talked a little bit about the conjecture of the fact that rates are starting to rise. We've talked about the fact that perhaps the fixed term opportunity for enterprises and government is starting to abate. How do you see the risks and the challenges of the contracting market manifesting?
Yeah, I mean, I'll jump on that one. I really, I think I want to jump on and put kind of the government hat on and jump on the back of what Subu was saying around there's still been continued resistance to spending. And absolutely, I agree, there will be. And I think there will be barriers to hiring contractors over the next 6 months, maybe longer, where in order to get a contractor approved, it'll be needing to go up to a CE level, which again is going to slow it down. There's going to have to be really specific needs and business cases for having a specific contractor. And where I'm going with this is, I think what we're probably going to see is we are, and as you've said, Jules, we're on the L and we're slowly starting to go up in contracting now, I feel. But it's probably going to be pretty gradual, I think, for the next 6 months. Touch wood that we don't get a resurface of anything else that kind of throws that out of mix. But we could be returning to closer to normal demand levels in contracting, as, the reality is we've only got so much talent. And when you don't have the talent to deliver what you need to deliver to New Zealanders, I think government agencies are going to bite the bullet and hire contractors. So I think next year we will start to see a shift in that contracting market really starting to rev up, but it's just when next year that happens. So that's a real risk, I think, for contractors right now.
I would agree with a bunch of that sentiment, and also, we've had evidence, anecdotally anyway, after the mayhem of the initial, I suppose, the post kind of lockdown, let's get back to finding out how we work. We were seeing new contract requirements coming through, but they were much shorter and much more more well defined, really. And if I had to kind of do any sort of navel gazing on next year, I would suggest that still short-term contracts will be coming through, well-defined ones with business cases. And as a contractor, I would be, I suppose my advice to contractors would be ensuring that they don't just presume that an entry point contract will snowball into doing this other business case and X and X and X. It will be very much, you'll be there for the job that you were signed up to do, and then you'll be 6 weeks out from that engagement ending, looking to the market and really engaging where your next contract comes from. Because I think people have, in a positive market, that just happens, right? You get a good person in, and then they just, they take on this and they take on that. And, it's happened to most contractors, I can imagine. But, I don't see that happening next year as much.
We're speculating a lot about what's coming next year, and following those breadcrumbs, or kind of do the navel gazing or horizon gazing that we, it's ingrained in us to do. I'm curious about what you all think about the way that contractors are engaged, because what tends to happen when things like COVID come across is that people change the way that they write contracts. Sammy, you've already talked about the term changing. You talked about the specification changing. Rob, what are your thoughts about what we can expect, or what contractors can expect as far as the actual contract goes? And what do you think people need to be cautious of or look forward to as far as the legalese that they'll be reviewing in their contracts?
That's a very interesting question, Julian. Thank you for asking it. I guess firsthand, I haven't had any insight into that yet, so it would be purely speculation on my part, an answer to that question. But fundamentally, just picking up on what Sam has highlighted previously, looking at the duration and the term of what's on offer, I think is important. I think as a contractor, diversification as having that in your skill set is very valuable, so you're able to work across industries instead of just one. And if you don't have that available to you, if you have been a contractor and you have just been in one industry, try and look to see where your relatable skills are. to see where they can be transferred to other industries. But yeah, I think the fixed term contract component is interesting too. I noticed that in my network that's been on the rise. But yeah, I find it's a difficult question for me to answer, I guess, Julian, because I haven't had any first-hand experience with that yet. A lot of the contracts that I've had experience with in the past have been very consistent to the next. So
Sure.
maybe something to look forward to.
Yeah. We will signal it early to our contract community if the contract is going to change, of course. Subu, thoughts?
Like if I were to navel gaze, it'll be more specific skill sets. The generic type of skills like project management. If it's more in tune with, say, for example, infrastructure, where organization might want to invest money in new technology in a part time. Those are the kind of skill set that will be coming out more. That generic project manager, where you say like I've done some project management, doing some application, then it becomes a little bit difficult to sell it to the organization. When senior people are looking at it, they say, what is the added value this person is going to bring? And if you say, for example, you've done some work in the newer technology, like integrating in the AWS side, or you've done some new implementation in the cloud-based infrastructure, then that is a skill set they will be looking for, because those are bit hard to find. Whereas if you say I'm an application project manager, I can develop new application, it's going to be a bit hard to sell. So they would be looking for fixed term contractors in that space to augment that generic skill set, rather than go for more expensive contractors.
Jules, just on that as well, I'm not sure if it's something that we'd planned to talk about, but on reflection, we're seeing it at the moment. Normally, the contract market as well is supplemented by immigrants coming into the country and supplementing the skills that have been mirrored 6 months before as being the need to be here, basically. And with borders still closed for majority of people, it'll be very interesting to see what happens with rates and also those really specific roles which we do have to insource to the country in order to get the volume happening. And usually they happen on the back of some sort of technology innovation that's then rolled out. But it'll be very interesting to see what happens next year with effectively a closed border and that lack of that talent pool coming in to supplement the already skills short markets in some of those areas.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point Sam's made there, and I want to pick up, I think, first off on the back of what Rob and Sam are saying around contract durations potentially being shorter for contractors. I tend to agree, but I actually really like that point around the talent pipeline, or the talent tap right now is pretty much switched off, which means that, going along with what Subu's saying in terms of actually contractors are probably going to be in demand if they've got really specific skills that are not easy to find. So really it may be those people that have got those really specific in-demand skills that find that they are still able to ask for the normal rate they would have, and potentially could get a longer contract term because people know there's not many of them around. So that's going to be really interesting to see how that kind of plays out, I feel, as well. Yeah, definitely. So I agree with that.
I think those are all really valid points, right? And obviously the contracting piece is a supply and demand question, as we've seen with fixed term rates fixed term contracts for people that wouldn't typically pick up those fixed term contracts. Rate surrenders, rate haircuts, where you've got very, very strong people in development roles or project management positions who are willing to take a step back for either for the consistency of the delivery of that project, or because otherwise they're going to be unemployed. I think that probably something Something that contractors need to front foot is the review of their current contracts that are in place for the clauses that could provide some uncertainty for them. Also making sure that they're insured through either the subcontract organisation that's with them or their own private insurance to ensure that they are actually protected for any kind of change or any liability that exists in the contracts at the moment. And I think as well that if people are entering into new contracts, it's probably worthwhile reviewing in a little bit more depth, or even asking the question of the person supplying that contract, is anything in here that's changed or is inconsistent with what has come before? Just to make sure that people aren't getting themselves into an agreement that they're not actually quite understanding of the implications of.
Jules, can I just add to that? And I think you're right from a contract point of view. The other piece that I've been thinking about as we've been talking is the demand for contractors being very specialised and hard to find skill sets. I think my advice for contractors would be to think about what is your USP? What is your unique selling point? What makes you different from other contractors? What is the key skill that you have that others don't have in the market? And is my CV, is my cover letter telling that story as good as it could? So I think that's probably something else for contractors to be thinking about right now, is making sure that if they've got a really great skill set, and I find this with contractors that I interview, when you actually dig into what they've actually done, they've done some pretty phenomenal stuff, but when you read their CV, it's so buried that you don't even pick it up. So I think that's even more important right now.
Rob and Subu, I'd be interested if you had any views on this from your own personal network. But contractors that you know who have accepted fixed term contracts recently, are they sort of touting those as, I suppose, a non-utilization insurance policy, and then they'll just break those when a contract role comes back to them? Or is that kind of how fixed term contracts being viewed at the moment?
There are two views. One is stability. So for stability's sake, some might accept that fixed term rule and then wait for things to turn out, move forward. Whereas there are others who are sticking to their gun, so to speak. They rather ride this out and stay in the contracting as a contractor as long as they can. And then look for other opportunities. But I think it's a gamble for those people. But the more I've seen is people are looking at what is this going to, how long is this going to play, and what guarantees do we have from a regular income perspective, and that's where people are generally turning to fixed term and saying, "I am happy to ride this." For the next year, 2 years, and then look at moving back into contracting. I would certainly look at that as well, because it's like we don't know how long this is going to pan out, and so if the opportunity, the work that you're doing is excellent, and the fixed term conditions are palatable, then you definitely look at take that as an option.
Yeah, I think there's a number of variables from my perspective in answer to that question, Sam. So some people go into contracting because they enjoy the variance of the learning opportunities from moving from one contract to another, and meeting new people, forming new networks, delivering new outcomes. It provides a continued learning opportunity. And then we have other people that have potentially been contracting inside organisations for quite a period of time. They've formed and established their relationships. They've found their place in the organisation. They enjoy being part of that culture, part of that environment. So I think there's a number of different things that would influence people to take or not take on a fixed term contract. Certainly the later of what I've just mentioned there. I'm aware of individuals in my network that have been contractors in particular organisations for quite a long time, and they've been offered a fixed term contract and they've taken it purely because they know the environment and they have established those relationships, and they they're happy with what they're doing in that current culture, there will be other contractors out there that will look at that as a strategy to make sure that to ensure that their options are covered by the income that they receive, that continues to be so via a fixed term contract. So I think there's a few different variables to look at, and it's not purely just a binary kind of decision to say, do I still want to stay in contracting? Do I need to take this fixed term contract? There will be people out there that perhaps won't want to do that because they'll want the challenge of a new assignment.
Agreed.
Thank you. Thank you both. So we've covered a lot. We've covered what the current conditions are within the public sector, within the private enterprise. We've talked about how organisations are choosing to engage their contractors on a fixed term, daily or hourly rate. We've talked about the rate surrenders and the predicted rate increases, terms of contracts, and we've talked about the types of projects or change initiatives that we're going to foresee happening or are currently happening now in response to COVID and in response to the economic uncertainty. It's time for us to get out our crystal balls and gaze out to our navels or the horizons and speculate a little on what we predict 2021 to offer. Predictions of when we're going to return to high times, perhaps. Predictions on the transformations or change programs that we're going to see both in the public and the private sector, and what contractors can expect to happen if you're heading into contracting or you're a career contractor yourself. So, Sammy, what are your predictions looking ahead for contracting?
I feel like people have pegged the end of the year, so 2021, or the transition into 2021, as the time where they've stalled some of those programs of work and are looking for funding. And I think if we're in the state that we think we're going to be in that time, it'll be well embedded that, hey, we're going to have to keep operating this for a little bit longer. So I believe, well, some of the sentiment I'm hearing from the market is that, yes, the new year is going to spawn new funding and some traction of some programs that have been stalled. Equally, knowing the NZ market, there are some big players making moves as well in banking and this, as you said, Rob, I think it was Rob earlier, regulatory change doesn't stop, and that's always a requirement for contract resource. So tip for all the recruiters out there: target regular. But no, I think to be honest, I'm still reserved in terms of the market because there is some sentiment around hyperinflation and that sort of thing coming, and this has been a massive drop in the economy and GDP, and I just don't think we have seen the total effects of that yet on business. Obviously, SMEs and things and most businesses in New Zealand have been propped up in some way by the government this year, and have probably managed to kick that that working capital down the road. And as that kind of dries out, maybe in 2021, it'll be an interesting time. But hey, here I'm glass half full, so let's hope that we come climbing out of it pretty quickly.
Cool. Abe?
Yeah, I mean, I share a lot of what Sam's talking about in terms of I don't know that we've seen the full impact just yet. However, I'm optimistic. And one of the key areas that makes me feel optimistic is going back to, I think, what Subu said around government wanting to look after people. And I think once we have the new government, whoever that is, that come in, their key priority is going to be ensuring that we grow the economy or do everything we can to grow it. And a key component of that and a key lever is creating employment. So I really do think we will see some of the programs that have been held off or stalled or maybe moved a bit slower starting to ramp up more so in 2021. But I think what we're going to see is a gradual increase in contracting demand. We've got to remember that the financial year for government starts 1 July in 2021. That always has an impact. So I think we might see a gradual increase coming into the end of this year, we'll see that continue into next year, and maybe an even bigger push from 1 July when the new budgets are refreshed. Will it return to the days of old? I don't think so in the next 6 months. However, into the future, I think, it potentially we could potentially see those days come back. But yeah, unlikely in the next 6 to 9 months.
Great. And Subi, perhaps you could further thoughts on that?
Yeah, if I were to gaze into the future, I would say, the second half of next year for things to start to slowly pick up. And then by the third quarter next year, it'll start to be, the true picture will emerge in terms of the work. And any government now will be looking at some regulatory kind of work, and that might spill into private sector as well, like Reserve Bank asking the banks to gear up for negative interest rates. That itself might generate quite a bit of work and other service sector as well. You might say, hey, as COVID is biting, these are some of the things that you need to put in place for you to operate. It's no point going up and down in the alert levels and expect the market. But there will be some guidance someday. So next year, I think it'll start to be a far better place.
Okay. Rob?
Yeah, look, there's a lot of variables going on here, folks. So I think in the here and now, we're in a holding pattern. It looks like that to me in the here and now until people fully understand what it is that we're going into next year. I think there's a number of key points I want to make. There will be organisations out there at the moment that will be feeling fatigue from remote working. I imagine that some of those organisations are carrying a lot of technical debt as a result of perhaps doing numerous tactical deliveries over time, and there could very well be contracting opportunity inside those organisations, as mentioned before, to revisit their operating model to make them work more productively, collaboratively and efficiently in a remote workforce, remote working model. And of course, I expect that to continue. Again, mentioned before, the pandemic is still happening. We've successfully managed to, I mentioned, move it outside of our house to our front door, but it's still there. It's still continuing. So the prospect of remote working is likely here to stay into next year. I think the point just made about negative interest rates, the Reserve Bank indicating that they want to move to that testing that model early next year, I think I agree with Subu, will potentially result in some regulation changes to anything risk and compliance based. And then, of course, not understanding how long our borders are intended to be shut has a direct impact on tourism, and then downstream from that, hospitality, retail, and accommodation. So all those sectors are pretty hard going in terms of contracting. So I think it's really a case of just trying to read the data and understand where to navigate to. But optimistically, I think there is always opportunity with change. We are in amongst some of the most impactful and rapid change that many of us have experienced, and there will be opportunities in amongst that are yet to be discovered.
Yeah, and further to what everyone's talking about there, and the sentiment that you've offered there, Rob, it is a massive time of change, and without being glib, there is opportunity in change, both for the public sector, for the private sector, for SMEs, etc. I think that when this change is forced upon you, as it has been in this instance, people do default to looking at technology to provide those solutions. And so I think we all need to count ourselves very lucky that we're working within the technology change space, and that we're working in the technology sector itself, because people are going to look to this sector to help. I think also from the perspective of looking at patterns of recessions previously, there will be recovery high times will come again. It's the natural wave of things, and we've just got to hold in there. For those organisations that have gone through that pain, the time will be a little longer, and for those who are enjoying the high times very quickly after this recession, they need to try to help out those organisations and people who have been affected. I guess one thing would be cool to look at now is all of us have been working in this contracting space for a long time. What's the one key piece of advice that you give to contractors right now? Sam, what would the key piece of advice that you'd give right now, looking ahead?
Ensure you've got a capability to network internally where you're there to do a job, but you're also there to build rapport and invest in your brand as a contractor. So as much as it's the role of the recruiter to be able to open new networks for you and place you into other organizations at the end of that engagement, it's really important that you build your own networks too, to I suppose hedge yourself in a downturn market, really.
Great. Abe.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think I'd probably jump back to one of my comments earlier. I think my advice to contractors would be, what is your USP? What is your unique selling point? And does your CV tell that story? I think that's probably the key things to be thinking about for contractors right now, if I'm thinking it from a recruiter perspective. Just make recruiters' lives and hiring managers' lives a lot easier. They can pinpoint exactly what it is that you bring to the table. So I think that's the key thing for contractors to be thinking about right now.
Nice. Super.
My advice would be, think about what works for each individual. Each individual might be different. I might think, fixed term might be the right thing to do right now, and think about doing that, or write it out. But think about what works and what doesn't work for you. And of course, always look at ways to increase your potential to sell, upsell in the future. But otherwise, take care and think about your personal situation.
Rob.
Look, I empathise and reflect with all that have spoken today. I think fundamentally, again, what Abe's mentioned around what makes you unique is really useful, and make sure that is articulated appropriately. I find networking invaluable, connecting with people, not just for future opportunities, but also to get a vibe and a feel for what's happening across different industries. That's really, really useful. And I think, again, just coming back to understanding what it is that you've actually worked on historically, and of those things, is there anything in amongst that's transferable to other industries? Because there are always transferable skills there, and being aware of them and being able to articulate them is really important. It's part of selling yourself into a role as well.
Well, look, thank you all for your time today. Thank you specifically to Subu and to Rob for your insights around the enterprise and the public sector. It's been invaluable. Sammy, Abe, clearly you care about your contractor community, so I appreciate you taking the time to talk about where we can help, but also how people can help themselves. Thank you all for the time today and for the care that you've shown our contractor community. Here's to a robust 2021.
Cheers.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Cool.